The sound of the front door closing echoed through the massive house like a gunshot. Richard stood in the hallway, his expensive suit still perfect, his tie still straight, but inside he felt like he was falling apart. He watched through the tall windows as another nanny walked down the driveway to her car, her shoulders stiff with frustration. That made seven nannies in 6 months. 7 people who had promised they could help, who had smiled confidently during interviews, who had excellent references and years of experience. And 7 people who had eventually thrown up their hands and walked away. Richard turned away from the window and looked at the staircase. His son sat there on the 5th step, right in the middle, rocking gently back and forth. The boy's hands were pressed over his ears and he was humming. That same tune over and over. Richard didn't know where the melody came from, but his son had been humming it for 3 hours straight now. "Hey, buddy," Richard said softly, taking a step closer. "She's gone now. It's quiet." The boy didn't look up. He just kept rocking, kept humming, lost in whatever world existed inside his head, a world Richard couldn't reach no matter how hard he tried. Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably his assistant with another crisis from the office. There was always a crisis. The company he'd built from nothing now employed over 3,000 people and was worth more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But standing here in his marble hallway, watching his 8-year-old son rock back and forth, Richard would have traded every penny of it to know what to do. He climbed the stairs slowly and sat down 2 steps below his son, careful not to get too close. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. The boy needed space, needed things to be predictable. Sudden movements, unexpected touches, even hugs could trigger a meltdown that lasted hours. "I know today was hard," Richard said, talking more to himself than expecting an answer. "New people are scary. Change is scary. I get that," the humming continued. The rocking continued. Richard felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the one that had lived there for 2 years now, ever since his wife died. She had been the bridge between Richard and their son. She had understood the boy in ways Richard never could. She'd known when to push and when to back off, when he needed quiet and when he needed engagement, how to turn a meltdown into a manageable moment. And then she was gone. A drunk driver, a rainy night, and suddenly Richard was alone with a child he loved desperately but didn't know how to reach. The house felt too big now. 17 rooms, 6 bathrooms, a pool, a home theater, a wine cellar he never used. It had been his wife's dream house, the place they'd moved to when the company finally made it big. She'd decorated every room with such care, choosing colors and furniture that would be calming for their son. Now it just felt like a museum, beautiful and cold and empty. Richard's phone buzzed again. He pulled it out and saw 15 missed calls. The merger meeting. He'd completely forgotten about the merger meeting. 5 hours of arguing with lawyers and investors about percentages and projections, and he'd walked out halfway through because the school called. Another incident. His son had gotten overwhelmed during lunch and locked himself in the bathroom, and the nanny couldn't get him out. Richard had left 20 executives waiting in a conference room and driven across town in the middle of the day. By the time he got there, his son was sitting on the bathroom floor, calm again, playing with the light switch. On off, watching the pattern of brightness and shadow. The nanny had been standing in the hallway looking like she wanted to quit right there. She'd lasted 2 more hours. "Mr. Wellington," a voice called from downstairs. Richard's head of security, checking in like he did every evening. "Everything secure for the night, sir. Alarms armed on the grounds." "Thank you, James," Richard called back. "The boy doing okay?" Richard looked at his son, still humming, still rocking. "Yeah, we're doing fine." It was a lie, but what else could he say? The truth was too complicated, too heavy to put into words. The truth was that Richard was drowning, and he didn't know how to swim anymore. After James left, Richard sat on the stairs for another 20 minutes. Eventually his son's humming slowed, then stopped. The rocking eased. These moments after the storm always felt fragile, like a soap bubble that could pop with one wrong move. "How about some dinner?" Richard asked quietly. His son stood up without a word and walked down the stairs, his hand trailing along the banister in that specific way he always did. Count the spindles, touch every 5th one. A pattern only he understood. Richard followed, keeping his distance, and they went to the kitchen. Dinner was the same as it had been for 3 weeks. Chicken nuggets, specifically the dinosaur-shaped ones from one particular brand, Apple slices cut into quarters, no skin. A glass of milk exactly halfway full. Anything different and the boy wouldn't eat at all. Richard had learned to keep the freezer stocked with boxes and boxes of those dinosaur nuggets. They ate in silence. Richard wanted to ask about school, about the other kids, about anything. But he'd learned that sometimes silence was better. Sometimes just being there, sharing the same space, was enough. Or at least it had to be enough, because it was all his son would accept. After dinner, Richard cleaned up while his son went to the living room. Through the doorway, Richard could see him lining up his toy cars. The boy had hundreds of them, and he arranged them in patterns that looked random but weren't. Richard had watched him once, seen the system. Organized by color, then by size, then by some other factor Richard couldn't quite figure out. The concentration on his son's face during these sessions was intense, total, absolute. Richard's phone rang. His assistant this time, not just a text. "I'm sorry," Richard said before she could speak. "The meeting. I know. Mr. Wellington, they're threatening to walk. They say you're not serious about the merger if you can't commit to being present." Richard looked at his son, carefully adjusting a red sports car so it was perfectly aligned with a blue sedan. "Tell them I'll call tomorrow." "Sir, this is a $200 million deal. I said I'll call tomorrow." He hung up and immediately felt guilty. His assistant was just doing her job. The investors were just doing their job. Everyone was just doing their job, and here he was, unable to hold up his end because he had to leave meetings to unlock bathroom doors and sit on staircases, waiting for humming to stop. The guilt was always there now, pulling him in two directions. When he was at work, he felt guilty for not being home. When he was home, he felt guilty for the meetings he missed, the calls he ignored, the deals that fell through because he wasn't paying attention. His wife would have known what to do. She always did. Richard walked to the mantel and picked up the photo of her. Taken 3 years ago on vacation, all of them on a beach. She was laughing, her hair blown by the wind, and their son was actually smiling, really smiling. Not the confused half-smile he sometimes gave when he knew he was supposed to but didn't understand why. "I'm trying," Richard whispered to the photo. "I'm really trying. But I don't know what I'm doing." The photo didn't answer. It never did. That night, after his son was finally in bed after the usual 2-hour routine of bath, pajamas, toothbrushing, story time with the same 3 books in the same order, Richard sat in his home office staring at his computer. The email from the nanny agency was already there, sent an hour ago. "We regret to inform you that we have no additional candidates available at this time. Given the specialized needs of your household, we recommend seeking a specialist care provider through medical channels. Translation: Stop calling us. We can't help you." Richard deleted the email and opened another one, this one from his company's HR director. Employee satisfaction surveys, productivity reports, strategic planning documents. All the things that used to excite him, that used to make him feel alive. Now they just looked like words on a screen. He closed the laptop and walked through the quiet house. Every light was off except the night light in his son's room. Richard stood in the doorway and watched the boy sleep. In sleep, he looked peaceful. No rocking, no humming, no anxiety. Just a kid dreaming whatever kids dream about. Richard made a promise, standing there in the dark. Tomorrow he'd try again. He'd call other agencies, other specialists, other therapists. He'd keep trying until he found someone who could help, who could reach his son in the ways Richard couldn't. He'd made his fortune by refusing to quit, by pushing through every obstacle until he found a solution. Surely he could do the same for his own son. He just wished it didn't feel so impossible. The next morning came too fast. Richard woke up to his alarm at 6, dragged himself through a shower and coffee and checked his schedule. Back-to-back meetings all day. He'd have to leave the house by 7 to make the first one. His son was already awake, sitting on his bed, organizing his action figures. The morning routine started the same way it always did. Getting dressed was a battle because the tags on shirts bothered him, and socks had to feel exactly right. Breakfast was predictable, at least. The same cereal, the same bowl, the same spoon. Anything different, and the day started with crying. By the time Richard got his son to the private tutor who came to the house each morning, he was already exhausted, and the day had barely begun. The tutor was kind but clearly struggling. Academic work with a child who couldn't always focus, who sometimes needed to rock or pace or hum in order to think, was incredibly difficult. We're doing our best, the tutor said as Richard prepared to leave. She always said that. Richard never knew if it was meant to reassure him or herself. I know you are. Thank you. As Richard drove to the office, his phone rang. The housekeeping agency. He almost didn't answer, assuming they were calling to quit too. Everyone quit eventually, Mr. Wellington. This is Linda from Premier Home Services. I understand your regular cleaning person is on vacation this week. Yes, that's right. Richard had forgotten all about it. We have a replacement available if you'd like. She can start today just for the week until your regular person returns. Richard thought about his messy kitchen, the bathrooms that needed cleaning, the floors that desperately needed mopping. That's fine. Send her over. Wonderful. Her name is Helen and she'll arrive around 9. Will anyone be home? My son and his tutor will be there. I'll let the security team know to expect her. Richard hung up and immediately forgot about the conversation. He had bigger problems. The merger was falling apart. His board was losing confidence in him and he'd just gotten an email about quarterly earnings that made his stomach drop. But none of it seemed to matter very much. Not compared to the image he couldn't shake. His son sitting on that staircase, humming and rocking. Completely unreachable. Richard pulled into his reserved parking spot at the office building and sat in the car for a long moment. The sun was just starting to break through the morning clouds. It looked like it might be a nice day. He wondered if his son would notice. Helen arrived at the mansion gates at exactly 9 o'clock. She sat in her old car for a moment, looking up at the massive house through the iron bars. 23 years she'd been cleaning houses, and she still got a little nervous when she saw places like this. Not because of the size or the wealth, but because rich people sometimes forgot that the help were human beings too. The security guard checked her identification and waved her through. She drove up the long driveway, past perfectly maintained gardens and a fountain that probably cost more than her yearly salary. Her car made a rattling sound as she parked near the service entrance. She made a mental note to get that checked, even though she probably couldn't afford the repair. Helen gathered her supplies from the trunk. The agency provided most things, but she always brought her own rags and her grandmother's old apron. Something about wearing that apron made her feel connected to the woman who'd raised her, who'd taught her that honest work was nothing to be ashamed of. She knocked on the side door and waited. A young woman answered, looking frazzled and tired even though the morning had barely started. You must be the cleaning service, the woman said. She was maybe 25, with her hair pulled back and stress written all over her face. I'm Amy, the tutor. Come in, please. Helen stepped into a mudroom that was bigger than her entire living room. Beyond it, she could see a kitchen that looked like something from a magazine. White marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, an island the size of a small boat. The owner left instructions, Amy said, pulling out a piece of paper. You're to work on the lower floors only. The main living areas, kitchen, dining room, bathrooms down here. Don't go upstairs. That's fine, Helen said. She'd had stranger instructions before. And just so you know, Amy lowered her voice, there's a child here, Mr. Wellington's son. He's 8 and he has some special needs. He might come through while you're working. Just don't be alarmed if he doesn't talk to you or seems upset. It's not personal, Helen nodded. I understand. I'll stay out of his way. Amy looked relieved. Thank you. We're in the library doing lessons if you need anything. It's the second door on the left in the main hallway. Helen got to work. She started in the kitchen, which despite its size wasn't too dirty. Rich people's kitchens were often the easiest because they barely used them. But this one had signs of real life. Crumbs on the counter, a sticky spot near the sink, dishes in the dishwasher that needed to be unloaded. As she cleaned, Helen hummed to herself. Old gospel songs her grandmother used to sing while cooking dinner after long days working in other people's homes. The songs made the work go faster, made the time pass easier. She'd been humming them so long she barely noticed she was doing it anymore. She was polishing the fancy faucet when she heard it, a sound from somewhere else in the house. Humming. Someone else was humming, but not the same song. Just one note over and over like a broken record stuck on the same spot. Helen paused and listened. The sound continued steady and unchanging. Then she heard footsteps quick and light. A door opened somewhere. The tutor's voice, worried and urgent. Sweetie, no, we need to stay in the library. We're not done with math yet. But the cars, a child's voice said, strained and upset. The cars are wrong. What cars, honey? The cars are wrong. The volume jumped suddenly from speaking to shouting. Helen put down her cleaning cloth and moved toward the doorway, staying back but trying to see what was happening. Through the hallway, she could see into what looked like a living room. A small boy was standing in front of a long row of toy cars, his hands flapping rapidly at his sides. The tutor stood a few feet away, clearly uncertain what to do. "Someone move them," the boy said, his voice high and panicked. "Someone moved the blue one. It goes here, it always goes here, and someone moved it." Okay, Amy said, reaching out. "Let's just put it back then." "No." "You'll do it wrong." "Everyone does it wrong." The boy's rocking got faster, his hands flapping harder. He was starting to cry, that kind of crying that comes from deep panic, not just sadness. Helen knew she should stay out of it. This wasn't her business. She was here to clean, not to get involved in family matters. But something in the boy's voice pulled at her. She'd heard that kind of panic before, a long time ago. She walked quietly into the living room. Amy saw her and looked embarrassed, like she'd been caught failing at her job. "I'm sorry," Amy whispered. "This happens sometimes. I'll get him calmed down." But Helen wasn't looking at the tutor. She was looking at the boy, at the perfect rows of cars, at the way he was rocking and humming and falling apart because something in his world had shifted. She'd seen this before. Her youngest brother, Tommy, used to do the exact same thing. Without asking permission, Helen sat down on the floor about 6 feet away from the boy. Not too close. Close enough to be present, far enough to not be threatening. She started humming again, but this time she hummed his note. The same single note he was humming, matching his rhythm, his tone. The boy's rocking slowed just a little. His humming stuttered, then continued. Helen kept humming, steady and calm. She didn't look directly at him. She'd learned that with Tommy. Direct eye contact felt like pressure, like demands they couldn't meet. Instead, she looked at the cars. After maybe 2 minutes, the boy's crying quieted to sniffles. His rocking was still there, but gentler now. Helen stopped humming and spoke, her voice soft and even. "Those are real nice cars you got there." The boy didn't respond, but his hands stopped flapping quite so hard. "I bet they have special places," Helen continued. "Every single one probably has its own spot, doesn't it?" The boy nodded, just barely. "And when things aren't in their spots, it feels wrong, like the whole world is tilted." Another nod, stronger this time. Helen reached out slowly and picked up a green car, one that was already in line with the others. She held it in her palm, letting the boy see it. "This one. Where does it go?" The boy looked at her hand, then at the line of cars, then back at her hand. Slowly, very slowly, he reached out and took the car from her. He placed it exactly where it had been, adjusting it 3 times until it was perfect. "That's right," Helen said. "You know where everything belongs." The boy was breathing easier now. The panic was draining away, leaving him tired but calm. He sat down on the floor, still a few feet from Helen, and looked at his cars. "The blue one," he said quietly. "Someone moved the blue one?" He nodded. "Which one is it, baby?" He pointed to a bright blue sports car that was indeed slightly out of line with the others. Helen could barely see the difference, but clearly to him it was huge. "Can you show me where it goes?" The boy carefully picked up the blue car. He held it close to his chest for a moment, like he was comforting it, apologizing for it being in the wrong place. Then he set it down in the line, adjusting it until it was exactly right. "There," he said. "Perfect," Helen said. "You fixed it all by yourself." The boy looked at her then, really looked at her, making eye contact for just a second before looking away again. "You hummed my song." "I did. It's a good song. Nobody else knows my song." "Well, now I do." Amy was standing in the doorway with her mouth slightly open, clearly amazed. In the 3 weeks she'd been tutoring this child, she'd never seen someone calm him down that fast. The boy stood up and walked out of the room without another word. Helen heard his footsteps going upstairs, heard a door close. She got up from the floor, her knees protesting a bit. She wasn't as young as she used to be. "How did you do that?" Amy asked. Helen shrugged. "Had practice. My brother was like him growing up. Not exactly the same, but similar. He needed the world to be predictable. When it wasn't, he'd fall apart just like that. I've been trying for weeks to figure out how to help him," Amy said. "Every day there's something. A sound bothers him, or his routine changes, or someone touches him wrong. I'm supposed to be teaching him to read and do math, but half the time we can't even start because he's too upset." "What happened to him?" Helen asked. "I mean, I know it's not my business, but his mother died 2 years ago. From what I understand, She was the only one who really knew how to connect with him. Since then, he's gotten worse. And Mr. Wellington, he tries, but he's always at work. There's been a parade of nannies, and none of them last. I'm just the tutor, but even I don't know how much longer I can do this. Helen felt a wave of sadness wash over her. A little boy who lost his mama, who couldn't understand the world around him, who had a father too busy or too lost to help, and everyone around him giving up because it was too hard. That poor baby, Helen said quietly. I should get back to lessons, Amy said. Thank you for helping, really. Helen returned to the kitchen and finished cleaning, but her mind wasn't on the work. She kept thinking about that little boy and his cars, about the panic in his voice, about how he'd said nobody else knew his song. She moved through the rest of the house, dusting and vacuuming and scrubbing. The place was beautiful but cold. It felt like a hotel, not a home. Pictures on the walls of the family, including a pretty woman with kind eyes who must have been the mother. She was in every photo, always with her hand on her son's shoulder, always smiling at him with such love. Helen was cleaning the downstairs bathroom when she heard footsteps again. She looked up to see the boy standing in the doorway watching her. Hi there, she said, not stopping her work. He didn't say anything, just stood there. Helen kept wiping down the mirror, humming softly. After a minute, the boy came a little closer. What are you doing? He asked, cleaning the mirror. Making it all shiny. Why? So people can see themselves clear. No spots, no streaks. The boy thought about this. I don't like mirrors. No? How come? They're confusing. The person in there moves when I move, but they're not real. Helen nodded. I can see how that would be confusing. The boy stepped even closer, close enough that Helen could see his face properly. He had his mother's eyes. What's your name? I'm Helen. What's yours? Thomas. Thomas. That's a good, strong name. My mom picked it, he said. Then his face got sad. She's dead. Helen's heart broke a little. I know, baby. I'm real sorry. Dad says she's in heaven, but I don't know where that is. I looked on the map, and it's not there. Helen set down her cleaning cloth and crouched down so she was closer to his level, but still not too close. Heaven's not a place you can find on a map. It's different from regular places. That doesn't make sense. I know it doesn't. A lot of things about death don't make much sense. Thomas seemed to appreciate her honesty. Dad cries sometimes at night. I can hear him. That's because he misses your mom very much. Just like you do. I don't cry. That's okay too. Everybody shows sad in different ways. Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he said, Do you want to see my trains? Helen smiled. I would love to see your trains. She followed him upstairs, knowing she was breaking the rule about staying on the lower floor but not caring very much. Thomas led her to his bedroom, which was surprisingly neat for a child's room. Everything had its place. Toys organized by type, books arranged by size, a shelf full of model trains lined up perfectly. This is my collection, Thomas said, his voice proud. I have 47 trains. This one is from 1922, and this one is from 1955, and this one... He went through each train, telling her its year, its type, its history. Helen listened, asking questions, admiring his knowledge. The boy was brilliant. He'd memorized so much information, could recall every detail. If people could just meet him where he was instead of expecting him to be like everyone else, they'd see how special he was. They sat on the floor for 20 minutes while Thomas told her about trains. His voice got more animated, more comfortable. He even laughed once when she asked if trains ever got tired of running on the same tracks. Trains don't get tired, he said, like she'd said something silly. They're machines. Well, sure, but maybe they get bored, Helen said with a smile. Thomas considered this seriously. I never thought about that. Maybe they do. A door opened somewhere downstairs. Heavy footsteps. A man's voice calling out, Thomas? Where are you? The boy's whole body tensed up. Dad's home. He's not supposed to be home yet. Richard appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, his hair a mess like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked exhausted and worried and then confused when he saw Helen sitting on the floor with his son. Who are you? He asked, not rudely but definitely surprised. Helen stood up quickly. I'm Helen, sir. From the cleaning service. I'm sorry, I know I was supposed to stay downstairs, but Thomas asked to show me his trains and I... She knows about the 1922 Pennsylvania K4, Thomas interrupted. Well, she didn't know, but I told her and she listened to the whole thing. Richard looked at his son, then at Helen, then back at his son. Thomas was sitting calmly, not rocking, not humming, not showing any signs of distress. He was just sitting there like a regular kid who'd been showing his toys to a friend. "You talked to her," Richard said slowly. "You showed her your trains. She's nice," Thomas said simply. "And she knows my song." Richard had no idea what that meant, but something in his chest loosened just a little. He'd come home early because Amy had called him, worried about the morning's meltdown. He'd left another important meeting, rushed across town expecting to find his son upset and unreachable. Instead, he found him calm and talking to the cleaning lady about trains. "Could I speak with you downstairs?" Richard asked Helen. "Of course, sir." Helen followed him down to the kitchen while Thomas stayed in his room, content with his trains. Richard poured himself a glass of water and drank half of it before speaking. "Amy told me what happened this morning." "With the cars?" "Yes, sir. He got a little upset, but he's okay now. She said you calmed him down in less than 5 minutes. Do you have training in this? Special education, behavioral therapy?" Helen shook her head. "No, sir. Just experience. My youngest brother had special needs similar to Thomas. Growing up, I helped my mama take care of him." Richard set down his glass. "I've had specialists come through here. Experts with degrees and certifications. None of them could do what you apparently just did." "Sometimes it's not about degrees," Helen said gently. "It's about understanding. Your son doesn't need someone to fix him. He just needs people who can meet him in his world instead of forcing him into theirs." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "The agency said you're only here for a week." "Yes, sir. Just filling in while your regular person is on vacation." "What if I asked you to stay longer?" Helen wasn't sure what to say. This was just supposed to be a temporary cleaning job. "I don't know, sir. I'd have to think about it." "Think about it," Richard said, "please. I don't know what you did up there, but I haven't seen my son that calm and happy in months. And if there's any chance you could help him help us, I need to know." Helen nodded slowly. She looked around the big empty kitchen, thought about the little boy upstairs with his trains and his songs and his broken heart, thought about a father who was clearly trying his best but drowning anyway. "I'll think about it," she said. But in her heart, she already knew what her answer would be. Helen came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. What was supposed to be a 1-week temporary job stretched into 2 weeks, then 3. Richard didn't ask the agency to send his regular cleaning person back. Instead, he asked Helen if she'd consider staying on permanently. She'd said yes, but not because of the money, though Lord knows she could use it. She said yes because of Thomas. Because every morning when she arrived, he'd be waiting by the window, watching for her car. Because he'd started smiling again. Really smiling. Not that confused half-smile he gave when he thought he was supposed to. The change didn't happen overnight. It was small things at first, barely noticeable unless you were paying attention. And Helen was paying attention. Thomas started coming downstairs in the mornings when he heard her arrive. He'd stand in the kitchen doorway, not saying anything, just watching her work. Helen would hum her grandmother's old songs and talk to him about simple things. The weather, the birds outside, what she was making for her own dinner that night. She never asked him questions that required complex answers. She never pushed him to respond. She just talked, easy and natural, like he was her friend. And slowly, bit by bit, he started talking back. "What song is that?" he asked one morning, the 3rd week she'd been there. "This one? My grandma used to sing it. It's called His Eye is on the Sparrow. Real old gospel song." "What's gospel?" "Church music. Singing about faith and hope and getting through hard times." Thomas thought about this. "We don't go to church. That's okay. You don't have to go to church to listen to the songs. Can you teach me the words?" So Helen taught him line by line while she cleaned the kitchen. Thomas had an incredible memory. By the end of the week, he knew the whole first verse and would sing it quietly to himself while playing with his trains. Richard noticed the changes too. He started coming home earlier, not because work was less demanding, but because he couldn't stand to miss another moment. He'd walk through the door around 5 o'clock instead of 8 or 9, and he'd hear singing coming from the kitchen, his son's voice mixed with Helen's, a little off-key but happy. The first time Richard heard it, he actually stopped in the hallway and just listened. When was the last time he'd heard his son sing? When was the last time he'd heard joy in this house? He found them making dinner together. Helen was showing Thomas how to stir pasta sauce, letting him stand on a step stool by the stove. Richard's first instinct was to worry about safety, about hot burners and splattering sauce, but Helen had it handled. She stood right next to Thomas, her hand hovering near his, ready to help but letting him do it himself. You've got to stir it gentle, Helen was saying. Big circles, nice and slow so it doesn't stick to the bottom. Like this? Thomas asked, his tongue poking out in concentration. Perfect. You're a natural, Thomas beamed. Then he noticed his father in the doorway. His smile faltered a little, like he was worried he'd done something wrong. Hey, buddy, Richard said softly. Making dinner? Thomas nodded. Helen's teaching me. We're making spaghetti. It's not dinosaur nuggets, but Helen said trying new foods is an adventure. Richard looked at Helen, who just smiled and shrugged. For 2 years, Thomas had eaten the same 5 foods in rotation. Every attempt to introduce something new had ended in tears and thrown plates. And here he was, stirring pasta sauce like it was the most natural thing in the world. An adventure, huh? Richard said. Yep. And if I don't like it, Helen said I don't have to eat it. But I should at least smell it and look at it so my brain knows what it is. That sounds like a good plan. Dinner that night was different. Richard couldn't remember the last time they'd sat at the kitchen table together, all of them eating the same meal. Usually Thomas ate his nuggets or his crackers while Richard ate takeout at his desk, both of them alone in the big house. But Helen had set 3 places, made a salad to go with the pasta, even put out the nice napkins. It felt like a real family dinner. Thomas didn't eat much of the spaghetti, but he tried it. He took 1 bite, chewed it thoughtfully, and announced it was okay but not his favorite. Helen praised him for trying, and Richard felt a lump in his throat because something so small felt like such a huge victory. After dinner, Helen started cleaning up, but Richard stopped her. I'll get this, he said. You've done enough. You sure? I don't mind, I'm sure. Besides, Thomas and I can handle some dishes, right, buddy? Thomas looked uncertain. Dishes weren't part of his usual routine. But Helen caught his eye and gave him an encouraging nod. You wash Dad dries? Thomas said carefully. Deal. Helen gathered her things to leave, and Thomas followed her to the door like he did every evening. She'd kneel down and he'd give her a high five, their little ritual. But tonight Thomas hesitated. Helen? He said quietly. Do you have to go? I'll be back tomorrow, sweetheart. Same as always. But why can't you stay? Helen glanced at Richard, who was standing nearby, and she saw something in his face, a question he didn't know how to ask. Well, Helen said carefully, I have my own home to go to, my own dinner to make, my own bed to sleep in. Oh. Thomas looked down at his feet. I thought maybe you could live here, in one of the empty rooms. We have a lot of empty rooms. Richard's chest tightened. His son was asking this woman to stay because he felt safe with her, comfortable in a way he hadn't been since his mother died. And Richard couldn't blame him because he was starting to feel the same way. That's real sweet of you to ask, Helen said gently. But I like my little apartment. It's cozy. Tell you what, though, how about tomorrow we make cookies after your lessons? Would you like that? Thomas perked up a little. What kind of cookies? What kind do you like? Chocolate chip. But only if the chips are spread out even, not all bunched up. Then we'll make sure they're spread out perfect. After Helen left, Richard and Thomas did the dishes together. They didn't talk much, but it was a comfortable silence. When they finished, Thomas went to line up his cars before bed, and Richard sat on the couch thinking. His phone buzzed with emails. 63 unread messages. Conference calls he'd missed. A text from his assistant asking if he was coming in tomorrow at all. 6 months ago, that text would have filled him with guilt. Now he just typed back, I'll be in after lunch. The next morning, Richard did something he hadn't done in years. He stayed home. He called his assistant and cleared his morning schedule, every meeting, every call. Then he went to the kitchen where Helen was already starting breakfast. Morning, Mr. Wellington, she said, surprised to see him. Thought you'd be gone by now. Decided to work from home this morning. I thought maybe I could sit in on Thomas's lessons if that's okay with Amy. Helen smiled. I think that would be real nice. Thomas came downstairs and stopped short when he saw his father still home. Did you forget something? He asked. Nope, just thought I'd spend the morning here. Is that okay? Thomas nodded slowly, processing this change in routine. Okay, but you have to be quiet during math. Amy says math needs concentration. I'll be quiet as a mouse. Richard sat in the corner of the library while Amy taught Thomas. He watched his son work through addition problems, saw how he needed to count on his fingers even though he could recite train manufacturing dates from memory. He saw how Thomas rocked slightly when he was thinking hard, how he hummed under his breath when he was stressed. He saw his son, really saw him maybe for the first time in a long time. After lessons, Helen came in with ingredients for the cookies they'd promised. Richard asked if he could help, expecting to be politely dismissed. Instead, Helen handed him a mixing bowl. "You can cream the butter and sugar," she said. "Nice and smooth, that's the secret." They worked together, the three of them, measuring and mixing and talking. Thomas wanted to know why cookies needed eggs, so Helen explained about binding ingredients. That led to questions about chickens, which led to a whole conversation about farms. Thomas was fascinated, asking question after question, his mind making connections that amazed Richard. When had his son gotten so smart? When had he learned to ask such thoughtful questions? It had been happening all along, Richard realized. He'd just been too busy or too tired or too overwhelmed to notice. The cookies went into the oven and they sat at the kitchen table waiting. Thomas was arranging the chocolate chips they had left over, making patterns on the table. Helen was telling a story about her grandmother's farm, painting pictures with her words. Richard just listened, feeling more present than he had in years. "Mr. Wellington," Helen said during a lull in the conversation, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What happened to all those nannies? Thomas told me there used to be a lot of different people taking care of him." Richard sighed. They couldn't handle it. Him. They'd last a few weeks, maybe a month, and then quit. Too difficult, they said. Too much work. Helen was quiet for a moment. That must have been real hard on Thomas. Getting used to someone new over and over just to have them leave. Richard looked at his son, who was still focused on his chocolate chip patterns. "I didn't think about it that way. I just kept trying to find someone who could help. Sometimes the help people need isn't what we think it is." Helen's voice was gentle, not judging. Those nannies probably came in with ideas about how Thomas should be instead of accepting how he is. And how is he? He's perfect exactly as he is. He just experiences the world different from most folks. That's not a problem to fix. It's just who he is. The timer went off for the cookies. Helen pulled them out, golden brown and perfect. Thomas insisted they wait exactly 5 minutes before eating them, because that's what the recipe said. So they sat there watching the clock, waiting. When they finally tried the cookies, Thomas took one bite and declared them the best cookies in the whole world. He ate 2.5, which was more new food than Richard had seen him eat in months. Later that afternoon, after Helen had left and Thomas was playing with his trains, Richard stood in his home office staring at his computer. The company needed him. The board needed him. Investors needed him. But watching his son through the doorway, seeing him happy and calm, Richard realized something. They'd all be fine without him for a while. The company would survive. But his son? His son needed him now in these moments, in these days that were slipping past so fast. Richard made a decision. He called his second-in-command, a brilliant woman who'd been with the company for 8 years. "Patricia, how would you feel about stepping up as acting CEO for the next 6 months?" There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. But I need to take some time. Family leave. My son needs me and I need to be here." "Of course. Whatever you need. We'll handle things. I know you will. That's why I'm asking you." After he hung up, Richard felt lighter than he had in years. Scared too, because stepping back from the company meant letting go of control, but also relieved. So deeply relieved. He walked to Thomas's room and sat on the floor next to his son. "Hey, buddy, want to tell me about your trains?" Thomas looked up suspicious. "You're not busy?" "Nope, I'm all yours. But you're always busy. You have important work." Richard reached out slowly and put his hand on his son's shoulder. Thomas didn't pull away. "I do have important work. And you're it. You're the most important thing I'll ever work on. I forgot that for a while, but I'm remembering now." Thomas was quiet, thinking. Then he picked up his favorite train, the 1922 Pennsylvania K4, and put it in his father's hand. "This one is special," Thomas said. "Want to know why?" "I really do." And Thomas told him everything, every detail, every fact, his voice getting more excited with each sentence. And Richard listened to every single word, making up for all the times he hadn't, storing away every piece of information like treasure. Because it was treasure. His son was treasure, and he'd almost lost him by not being there, but now he was here. And he wasn't going anywhere. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Helen was probably home by now, making her own dinner in her small apartment. Richard made a mental note to talk to her tomorrow about a raise. A significant one. She'd changed their lives, maybe even saved them, and she deserved more than just a cleaning salary. But more than that, he wanted to thank her, really thank her in a way that mattered, because Helen hadn't just cleaned his house. She'd helped him find his way back to his son, and there wasn't enough money in the world to repay that kind of gift. 3 months had passed since Helen first walked through the door of the Wellington mansion. 3 months that had changed everything. Richard had kept his promise to himself. He'd stepped back from the daily operations of his company, trusting Patricia to handle things while he focused on what really mattered. His mornings now started with breakfast with Thomas talking about whatever was on his son's mind. Usually trains, sometimes cars, occasionally dinosaurs, which Thomas had recently become fascinated with after Helen brought him a book from the library. The house felt different now, warmer somehow, even though the temperature hadn't changed. There was laughter in the hallways, music in the kitchen, the sound of life being lived instead of just endured. But change never comes without challenges. And the biggest challenge was about to walk through Richard's front door. It started with a phone call. Richard's mother, who lived 3 states away and visited maybe twice a year, announced she was coming for a week-long stay. She wanted to see her grandson, she said, make sure he was being properly cared for. Richard felt his stomach drop. His mother was a difficult woman at the best of times. Cold, judgmental, obsessed with appearances and what other people thought. She'd never understood Thomas, never tried to. After his wife died, she'd suggested boarding schools and special facilities, places that could handle children like him. Richard had stopped taking her calls for months after that. She's coming tomorrow, Richard told Helen the next morning. He was stress-pacing in the kitchen while she made breakfast. For a whole week, Helen cracked eggs into a bowl, her movements calm and steady. Your mama? Yes, and she's going to have opinions about everything. About Thomas, about how I'm running the house, about... He stopped himself, but Helen understood. About me, she finished quietly. I don't care what she thinks about that. Your family here. You know that. Helen smiled, but there was sadness in it. Mr. Wellington, I'm the help. That's just how it is. Some people are always going to see it that way, and that's okay. It's not okay with me. I know, but let me tell you something my grandma used to say. You can't control what people think about you. You can only control how you treat people. So when your mama gets here, you just be yourself. Love your son the way you've been learning to. The rest will sort itself out. Richard wanted to believe that. But he knew his mother. She had a way of making him feel like a child again, uncertain and never quite good enough. Margaret Wellington arrived the next afternoon in a town car, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. She was in her 70s but looked 60, thanks to excellent health care and probably some surgical help. Her silver hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless, her jewelry understated but expensive. Thomas watched from the window as she climbed out of the car, her face pinched with disapproval at something only she could see. Is that grandmother? He asked. Yes, buddy. Remember, she's going to stay for a little while. I don't like her, Thomas said matter-of-factly. She smells funny and she talks too loud. Richard couldn't really argue with that assessment. Margaret swept into the house like she owned it, which in a way she felt she did. She'd lent Richard the money for his first business venture, something she reminded him of regularly. Her eyes swept over the entryway, the living room, cataloging everything, finding it all somehow lacking. Richard, she said, offering her cheek for him to kiss. You look thin. Are you eating properly? I'm fine, Mother. Good to see you. She turned her attention to Thomas, who'd hidden behind his father. Thomas, come give your grandmother a hug. Thomas pressed harder against Richard's leg. I don't like hugs. Nonsense. Family hugs family. Mother, he's not comfortable with physical contact unless he initiates it. We've talked about this. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. We've also talked about making excuses for behavior. Children need structure and discipline. Richard felt Helen's presence before he saw her. She'd come from the kitchen, probably hearing voices. She stood in the doorway wearing her apron, a dish towel in her hands. Margaret's eyes landed on her and something cold flickered across her face. And who is this? This is Helen, Richard said. She's been helping us with the house and with Thomas. I see. Margaret's tone made those 2 words sound like an indictment. Another nanny? How long has this one lasted? Helen's not a nanny, Thomas said, surprising everyone. He didn't usually speak up around his grandmother. She's our friend. Children don't have friends who are staff, dear. They have caregivers. Helen stepped forward, her smile warm despite Margaret's coldness. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Wellington. Can I get you some tea? You must be tired from traveling. I'd prefer coffee. Strong, black, no sugar. Coming right up. After Helen left, Margaret turned to Richard. We need to talk privately. They went to Richard's office while Thomas retreated to his room. Margaret didn't waste time on pleasantries. What exactly is that woman's role here? I told you. She helps with the house and with Thomas. She's a cleaning woman, Richard. Since when do cleaning women involve themselves with family matters? Since she turned out to be better at connecting with my son than any trained professional I've hired. Margaret scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. The boy needs proper therapy, proper education, proper structure, not some woman humming gospel songs and letting him make cookies. Richard felt his jaw tighten. How did you know about the gospel songs? I asked the tutor. Amy, is it? She was quite forthcoming about the changes around here. Apparently you've been home quite a lot lately, neglecting your responsibilities at the company. I've delegated responsibilities. There's a difference. You've gone soft, Richard. Your father would be ashamed. That hit hard, the way she knew it would. Richard's father had built a business empire through ruthless determination, working 80-hour weeks until a heart attack killed him at 59. He'd missed every school play, every birthday, every moment that mattered, and Richard had spent years trying to prove he could be just like him, until he realized being like his father was the last thing he wanted. My father died having never really known me, Richard said quietly. I won't do that to Thomas. Your father provided for this family. He gave us everything, except his time, except his presence, except the things that actually matter. Margaret stood up, her face flushed with anger. I came here out of concern for my grandson. I see now that concern was justified. That boy needs professional help, not friendship with the help. And you need to remember who you are and what you're responsible for. She swept out of the office, leaving Richard feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. Dinner that night was tense. Margaret criticized everything from the food to the way Thomas held his fork. She made pointed comments about discipline and proper upbringing. Thomas got quieter and quieter, shrinking into himself in ways Richard hadn't seen in months. Helen served the meal and then disappeared into the kitchen, sensing the family needed space. But Richard could see Thomas glancing toward the kitchen doorway, looking for her like a lifeline. After dinner, Margaret announced she was tired and went to her guest room. Thomas immediately ran to find Helen, who was washing dishes. Is she always like that? Thomas asked. Your grandmother? I think she just has her own way of doing things, sweetheart. I don't like her way. I like our way better. I know you do. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, She doesn't like you. Helen didn't insult him by denying it. Some people have a hard time seeing past what they expect. Your grandmother probably thinks I'm here just to clean floors, but you do so much more than that.